Good day, everyone. So, we are the reporters number 5, and I am Jovelyn Piminadang, the first presenter for this topic. So, our topic for today is all about the classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, or the Pavlovian theory. So, I will give you a short background or trivia about this classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, kung paano siya nagsimula at ano yung mga naging lead ng pag-experiment ni Ivan Pavlov dito sa classical conditioning na ito. So, like many great scientists, no, Pavlovian conditioning, aka the classical conditioning, was discovered accidentally. So during the 1890s, a Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, researching salivation in dogs in response to being fed, he inserted a small tube into the cheek of each dog para ma-measure yung saliva ng aso kapag ito ay pinapakain ng meat. So, after that is, si Pavlov, nagkaroon siya ng predicted about the dog that they will only salivate in the response doon sa food na nakalagay sa harapan nila. But then, after that is, na-notice din ni Ivan Pavlov na yung aso is, they will begin to salivate whenever na naririnig nila yung yapak ng kanyang ng kanyang assistant, which is yung kanyang lab assistant na merong dalang food doon sa mga aso na yon. So, si Pavlov is na-discover niya itong object na ito doon sa event ng dog. So, the dogs daw, na-discover ni Ivan Pavlov na the dogs learn to associate with food, such as yung dala ng lab assistant niya. So, dito sa classical conditioning na ito, no, napatunayan sa discovery ni Ivan Pavlov na the response of the dog is food trigger. So na-realize na dito yung important scientific discovery, no, this scientific discovery niya about dito sa salivation of the dog dun sa response to a certain things. So actually, according to some physiologists, no, si Ivan Pavlov, he devoted the rest of his career to studying this type of learning, which is yung classical conditioning. So that's the background or the short trivia about kung paano nagsimula yung experiment ni Ivan Pavlov in terms of this classical conditioning. So now let us proceed to the conditioning introduction. So this conditioning introduction, no, as this theory of Ivan Pavlov is all about learning the human behavior. So involves dito yung natural stimulus, which is the object or event. Meaning, ang mga natutunan natin is our reaction or response sa isang bagay. So, yung stimulus, it was provided by the instructor. So, instructor means is the certain things or event. So, the response naman is provided by the learner. Yung learner is tayo na kung saan tayong mga tao na kung saan nagkakaroon tayo ng certain response to a certain things. Next naman is the reinforcement provided by the instructor. So, yung reinforcement is malalaman natin itong information about reinforcement doon sa theory ng operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner, if I'm not mistaken. So, stimulus actually is, ito yung object or event na once na nakita or let us say na smell natin, doon tayo nagkakaroon ng responses or reactions. Yung response naman is our reactions or actions on a certain things. So, no, di ba? So, now is nalaman natin yung short history ng classical conditioning, and nalaman din natin yung conditioning introduction. So, to give us a more information about classical conditioning, no, mapapanood natin or malalaman natin doon sa part ni Amir Mahmoud. So now, let us proceed to another part of my report about the about the Pavlov experiment, kung paano natin siya pwedeng gamitin in terms of behavioral therapies and in terms of counseling, kung ano yung use ni classical conditioning doon sa therapist at the same time sa counseling. Nalaman na natin yung mga principles, stages, and components of classical conditioning mula sa report ni Amir Mahmood. So now, let us proceed naman to the three major types of learning and nandito sa tatlo na yun, yung classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and the social learning theory. So, itong learning through association is the classical conditioning. So, this classical conditioning is a type of learning that happens unconsciously. So, this classical conditioning is our automatic learn responses to a certain things. This is also what we call the unconscious learning. So, example is that, pumunta ka sa hospital like that. So, para magpa-inject. So, sabi sa'yo ng doktor, huwag kang mag-alala, hindi to masakit. So, yung pagkasabi sa'yo ng doktor na huwag kang mag-alala, hindi to masakit, that was the conditioned stimulus. After that is, nagkaroon ka ng injection mula sa doktor na yon. Yung injection na yon is what we call the unconditioned stimulus. Kapag yung wag kang mag-alala, hindi to masakit is conditioned stimulus, pagsamahin natin siya ng painful shot which is yung pag-inject sa'yo, nagiging unconditioned stimulus na yung nangyari. So next naman is after a week, after a long day is pumunta ka ulit sa dental clinic para magpabunot ng ngipin. Sabi sa'yo ng dentist is that wag kang mag-alala, hindi to masakit. Although, alam mo, yung salitang huwag kang mag-alala, hindi ito masakit is hindi naman siya literal as in na masakit is tumakbo ka. That was your conditioned response. Bakit ka tumakbo? Because we always remember that classical conditioning is you learn to respond to something based on repeated interactions with it. Bakit ka tumakbo? Kasi nga, diba, dun pa lang sa nagkaroon ka ng injection dun sa doctor is that was your interactions. So, parang naulit lang din siya nung pumunta ka doon sa dental clinic. So, dahil sa nangyari na yun is nagkaroon ka ng response to a certain stimulus. So, your response is yung tumakbo ka. So, next naman is itong learning through consequences, which is yung operant conditioning. As ito is by the consequences is kumbaga nagkakaroon tayo. Kumbaga dito is you learn a behavior by the consequences of that behavior na pwedeng ma-affects yung future behavior mo. So, this operant conditioning, it was developed by B.F. Skinner, if I'm not mistaken. It will be reported by the next reporter. The next naman is the learning through observation. Itong learning through observation is social learning theory to siya by Albert Bandura, no? By observing other people, nagkakaroon tayo ng changes of our actions, or by watching other people, dun tayo nagkakaroon ng learning. So now is nalaman na natin yung history ng classical conditioning, kung ano yung mga naging steps ni Ivan Pavlov. So ano din yung three major types of this learning conditioning. So now let us proceed to the applications of Pavlov's experiment. So itong classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov can be used in learning, treating fears, or even in phobias, guys. So, we can use this classical conditioning in terms of exposure therapy. So, what is exposure therapy? So, exposure therapy it helps to manage the problematic fears. So we have a different kinds of exposure therapy. We have the three main types of exposure therapy. The first one is the imaginal exposure. So dito sa imaginal exposure, no, Dito naman is based on imagination of a certain person na meron siyang fear of something that a certain things na kumbaga nagkakaroon siya ng takot doon. So for example dito is yung taong meron siyang agoraphobia or yung taong merong fear of crowded places. So that person might imagine na nakatayo siya sa maraming tao. So that's the imaginal exposure. In vivo exposure naman, dito is ginagamit dito yung real life scenarios. By using real life scenarios, for example, yung taong merong fear of flying. So for example, si Pedro is meron siyang fear of flying. Dadalhin natin si Pedro doon sa airport para ipapakita sa kanya yung paglanding ng plane, yung pag-alis ng plane, yung paglipad ng plane. That's the vivo exposure. Si virtual reality exposure naman is dito pinagsama dito si imaginal exposure at saka si imaginal exposure at saka si vivo exposure. So for example, yung taong merong acrophobia o yung merong acrophobia or yung tinatawag nilang merong fear of heights, ganon. So that person might participate in a virtual simulation of climbing down a fire escape. So paano natin dito mapasok si classical conditioning? So for example meron kang panic attack. So in a certain place like sa elevator, ganyan. But then, sinakyan mo pa rin yung elevator, then you experience fear in all, of course. Dun sa elevator rides. Kasi nga, meron kang fear dun sa elevator na yun, nagkakaroon ka ng panic attack. So, that experience of yours is a negative stimulus na pwedeng maka-apekto sa iyong response. So, paano mapasok doon yung classical conditioning? We always remember is that phobias are based on irrational fear. So, if someone is exposed to the object or situation na kinakatakutan nila, then without the negative outcome, si classical conditioning can help to unlearn the fear. So, like once you've gone in 100 elevators like that and walang na-experience na panic, the result is that you should no longer associate with panic. Kagaya nga sinabi ko kanina, di ba? Si classical conditioning is you learn to respond to something based on repeated interactions with it. So, kapag yung person meron siyang takot doon sa elevator na yun and pinaulit-ulit natin siya pinasakay doon, pinaulit-ulit siya nagkaroon ng interactions doon, no? Si classical conditioning might help to unlearn the fear doon sa person na yon. So now let us proceed to aversion therapy. Si classical conditioning, we can also use it in aversion therapy. So si aversion therapy is a therapy intended to stop a bad habit such as smoking and etc. So this is, for example, merong isang taong gusto ng aversion therapy. So para mahinto yung habits nila is in smoking, so that person might receive an electric shock. So dito is yung taong gustong tigilan yung paninigarilyo nila si aversion therapy, ang ginagawa niya, for example, is that habang naninigarilyo siya, meron siyang electric shock na nakalagay sa kanyang ulo. So, ganun. So, kung mapansin nyo, si aversion therapy is masyadong hard yung therapy dito sa aversion na yon. So, paano napasok dito si classical conditioning? Simple. The goal of the conditioning process is to make the individual associate the stimulus with unpleasant or uncomfortable sensations. That's the use of classical conditioning in therapies or in behavioral therapies. So now, let us proceed to the 3 ways to use classical conditioning in therapy and counseling. So we can use also this classical conditioning in terms of counseling. Since our subject is social work counseling, we can use also this classical conditioning in counseling by Mark Tyrrell. So the problem with pattern matching. So this problem with pattern matching is that it depends to a people or a person na kaharap mo, paano ka magre-response at paano nila maunawaan yung mga sinasabi mo, gesture mo, or acts na ginawa mo. So, it happens to us unconsciously. But this automatic pattern is very useful. At the same time, it can also cause a problem. Kasi nga, di ba, we are unconsciously response on a certain things. But then, those therapists, no, they are using this pattern matching in a 3 ways to become helpful for them. So, the first one dito is yung use words. So, use words. Alam naman natin na words is very powerful. For example, think of the words, then sabihin mo yan to a 3-month-old baby. So, the baby is they will not react kasi nga hindi pa nila natutunan mag-associate doon sa specific meaning of the word na sinasabi mo sa kanila. Para sa 3-month-old baby is those word, it is just a meaningless noise for them. But if you use words to a person na alam na paano mag-associate dun sa specific meaning of the words, then they will know how to react. You can use this way to evoke a particular positive state in your client. Like, for example, cheerful words, kumbaga, we say you can do it, you did well, it's okay for them to become positive. Kumbaga, pag naisip ng client mo yung mga cheerful words na pinagsasabi mo during your interactions with them is that during your repeated interactions with them is that nagkakaroon sila ng reactions in a possible way. So in short, using words will trigger them a good feelings. Kapag paulit-ulit mong sinasabi sa client mong yung mga cheerful words sa kanila, so meron din kayong paulit-ulit na interactions with them, doon na papasok si classical conditioning. At the same time, that can lead a way to have a trigger them a good feelings. So next naman is use places. So dito naman is, 'di ba, every one of us is may problema talaga tayo on a certain place. It's either on our school, house, and so on. So for example is if you have a bad experience in school, so every time na pumapasok tayo is you remember it. So halimbawa, 'di ba, kanina yung sinabi ko kanina na yung taong pumunta siya sa hospital. So even though na hindi naman talaga siya literal na hindi naman talaga siya as in pumasok or pumunta doon sa hospital na kung saan doon siya unang galing, di ba? After the second time, pumunta siya doon sa dental clinic. Although hindi naman siya bumalik doon sa dating hospital kung saan doon siya nagpa-inject, is that pagkapasok niya doon sa dental clinic is naalala niya yung nangyari sa kanya doon sa una niyang pinuntahan, which is yung pag-inject sa kanya. So that case is nagkaroon agad siya ng response on the certain events or things. So, but then we can use this place like chill places where nare-relax tayo kapag nandun tayo. Then nalilimutan natin yung problema natin. Kumbaga, you let go of negative things. Example is nasa place ka kung saan maraming tao, then you feel like na wala kang space for yourself, tapos pumunta ka sa less crowded place like that, like forest, then kumalma ka, positive lang yung nasa place, kaya parang you feel safe and sound. So dito is kumbaga, 'di ba, kapag sinabi ko kanina sa classical conditioning, kapag paulit-ulit tayo nagkakaroon ng interaction within a specific things, is nagkakaroon tayo agad ng response. So parang yung tao din, kapag kapag paulit-ulit lang din natin pag ulit-ulit tayo pumupunta doon sa place na kung saan na-feel natin yung security natin, na-feel natin yung safety natin, is that hindi natin namamalayan na nagkakaroon na tayo ng response doon sa place na yun. Like, pagpunta mo pa lang ng forest, since nasanay ka na pumunta sa forest para maging relax, pagdating mo pa lang doon, parang na-feel mo na agad yung calmness ng forest doon para sa iyo. So, that's what your response to that things or event na kung saan it involves the classical conditioning. So, next naman is the use physical patterns. So these physical patterns, no, dito naman is, for example, is you have a funny friends like that. So you have a funny friends, then every time they will tell a joke, their voice and laughter is parang na-associate mo na every time na tumatawa sila is, so every time na tumatawa sila is inaakbayan ka. Then pretty soon is nagkaroon ka ng unconditioned response sa kanila. Like, every time na inaakbayan kanila is kahit wala silang joke na sinasabi is tumatawa ka na. I mean, like, those touch, which is yung pag-akbay, it brings a smile to your face. Kahit wala silang joke na sinasabi sa'yo. So, dito is we can use it in a certain client. You can use this pattern to ask your client to squeeze their thumb and their forefinger together, so it helps them to evoke a positive feeling. So, di ba? Positive feeling. So, kapag yung mga ganung pangyayari, like paulit-ulit na rin nagkaroon ng interaction, paulit-ulit na rin nangyari sa'yo, paulit-ulit na rin nangyari dun sa client mo, like yung pag-squeeze ng kanilang forefinger, their thumb together. So, ganun is, pag nakasanayan na ito is every time na ginagawa nila by squeezing their thumb together with their forefinger is can make them empowered. So that's all the classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, no? Dito sa topic nito, nalaman natin yung history ng classical conditioning, kung paano siya nag-start. Dito rin sa topic nito is nalaman natin yung mga stages, components of the classical conditioning. Nalaman din natin kung paano natin pwedeng gamitin si classical conditioning in terms of our behavioral therapies and in terms of counseling. I hope you understand and gain more lessons, more understanding, more knowledge about this topic. So if you have a question, you may put it in a comment section, and I will answer it. I will answer it if I given a chance. So I will answer it. So guys, thank you for watching and listening.